So, guys, I do want to talk about The Simpsons, and what I really want to say is that it's been teased that their 34th season may be their last season, and there's two things about it. People need to remember what happened with Teen Titans Go. That with Teen Titans Go, they did like a series finale, and then they said April Fools, and then usually what happens with a lot of television shows, they could easily do that as well too. Because remember, the series finales of television shows usually end in April or May, like the summer season. Or there could have been a troll job, really. And, obviously, what happens with The Simpsons and Family Guy and South Park and other shows that have been on for a very long time is that, obviously, even if they get like 700, 600, or 500,000 views, they're going to still continue because, it's like, if it's like a New York steak and now it's like the McDonald's burger. If that's the drop in quality, and that quality, they're gonna still be making money. It's a cash cow, really. But I would be very happy if the show ended because there was someone who said that every episode of a show is almost like the show aging a year, really. So The Simpsons is almost like a 650-year-old person, really. Like, how can you really relate to that? And then also, as somebody who was born in 1987, I was actually born 2 months before The Simpsons, because The Simpsons was November 1987. That, I've definitely seen it through the 90s. It was probably the most edgy show that I watched because my parents didn't let me watch a lot of just inappropriate television. But it was definitely probably the most it was probably like the most like pushing show that I ever watched. And as people said, when you watch The Simpsons, they had a philosophy. It had to be funny, it had to have satire, and it had to have heart. And the other part of it was that it had good writing, really. And you got those four things from The Simpsons. But nowadays, I really think they throw anything at the wall, really. And I also just think that, they're not as ambitious or risk taking. I think, like, probably the worst episode of The Simpsons was the one where Homer and Marge get a divorce. And what happens is that they meet new people and then they're happy and then they just are teasing good storylines, and then you realize it was a dream of Homer Simpson as a way of just saying, F you, audience, we're going to do what we do best, which is we're going to keep the formula, we're not going to challenge ourselves, and we get something better. Like, I think that the other issue is that there's so much more that The Simpsons can do, but they don't want to do it. Like, as I said, what would happen if Marge and Homer get a divorce, and Homer has a bunch of like non-platonic relationships, or if he really explores his character a lot more. What would happen if Homer got fired from the nuclear power plant, and then he actually learned, or he went to therapy and he realizes that obviously he's acting out his trauma, which is that everything in his life that hurt him was because of Mr. Burns. His mother went away because of Mr. Burns. He's stuck at the job because Mr. Burns is not going to give him an opportunity to leave, or other things like that. So if he kind of learned that maybe he should just go bigger and better, and he's accomplished bigger and better, really. If he learned to actually be more self-motivated or overcome his alcoholism, I think then, and seeing that character change, I think that would make a better show, really. But they're like, nope, we're going to have him as the beer guy. We're going to have him do this and that, because it's two things. It's more challenging writing to do it that way. And then also it does change the show, but sometimes, some changes are necessary. You look at South Park, where, they went from a bunch of toilet humor to a bunch of more satire, and then they've gotten to just be more of a satire on contemporary events, and now they do a lot of cinematic episodes. And they've also have done things in South Park, like obviously after the chef controversy, they just killed off his character, just to say we've moved on from it. Or they've done things like they've introduced new characters like PC Principal, or other characters that are kind of more of a satire of the common day. Like, Officer Bart Brady's a dumb police officer, but obviously, PC Principal is a reflection of the PC culture and entitled millennialism, and then how some millennials don't look at their behavior as bullying, and how sometimes, nowadays, because in the cultural zeitgeist, millennials just being outraged by things and taking that into bullying or harassment, or in the workplace, unfair consequences. That's kind of why, they created PC Principal, and that's why they introduced characters like that. I mean, one thing I'm not happy with is ended up the teacher is replaced with a black woman. I'm not happy that Bart's teacher is black, because what I do see about it is it's racial shoehorning. They're just saying, okay, we're going to put a couple of Negroes in the show just because that's just what we do. And as somebody who's mixed race, I'll tell you that it is a little offensive. It's like 1-800 rent a Negro is what they called, So you can do more than just featuring more black people in The Simpsons, because, you want to feature more minorities, because nowadays that's what people like, really. I like what South Park did with the Pander Universe special, where they talked about, okay, it doesn't make you're not improving the quality of the show. You're just saying, okay, we're going to throw in a couple of black people like their tools, like their objects. You're going to throw in a couple of Asians like their tools and their objects, and other people like that. Not because of having them have good dimensions or backstory. You're actually going to have them just be there to be there. It could have been an interesting episode. They had Bart have a black teacher, and then somebody says something, like maybe Nelson or Bart says something. That's just the fad nowadays. Is that there's more black people everywhere, because society just it's not that he's racist. It's just that society it just does that. It's just for social justice brownie points. And then maybe what she can tell him is that okay, I was the only person that applied for the job. And she used to have some racist beliefs about white people and opportunities, and it could have been an episode where she had a background on maybe being racist and change your ways. And then also Bart learns that just because there's more diverse people in his town doesn't mean that it's people just getting jobs or opportunities for presentation. It's about people who also want to change and become better people, really. So that could have been a good episode. That could have been a really good insight. The same way with Homer's phobia with John Waters. That was a really big insight of homophobia. Like, Homer was homophobic because he was afraid that his son would learn from gay people to become homosexual as a gay people just inspire other men to become gay as well. And that's a big stereotype. And there was also in that episode that stereotype of gay people will becoming homosexual is bad because it encourages being feminine and sissy and weak and just and very flirty, and then very just like monotone. Like, every gay person's like, hello, or Jesus Christ. That's kind of why Homer's phobia was such a very powerful episode, because it showed Homer that he could break his stereotypes. But if you introduce a character like Bart's teacher and have that conversation about stereotypes people have about more minorities in the workplace, or saying that it's affirmative action, or it's pandering, or it's just about it's about presentation, when there could be a backstory behind that character and make them dimensional, because that would make it a lot better. And I've seen clips of his teacher, and I really think that what Bart's teacher is more than likely somebody who has infinite patience, but she knows how to, just like with Bart's brain, that episode, she knows how to kind of create a consequence to actually teach him to stop pranking, even though you have the status quo as God with The Simpsons. So I'm just not happy with the new characters. And I also will say that they've had more black characters and other races, not because of trying to introduce something new or a new dynamic. It's more just the pandering. I know one episode I did not like as well was when Bart goes unconscious for doing a stupid stunt, like I think jumps off a dam or something like that, and he hits his head really, and then he's talking about talking to his uncle or grandpa and Jesus. And I hated that because Disney is known for being very religious, so they were almost trying to do some religious pandering in that episode, and it felt very forced, because The Simpsons have made comments about religion, But one thing I do like is that you have Homer sleeping in church, because it's almost like saying like no matter what, it's not really religious pandering. Or it's not trying to convert people into like religion. But I felt with that episode, they had Bart praying and doing other things like that, and just like holy music and everything like that. So I really felt that that episode, it came off as religious pandering, or religious pandering of having faith. And we all know that ABC, American Broadcasting Company owned by Disney, they've traditionally have had a pattern of just wanting people to be pro-Christian, and other things like and other things like that. So I just didn't like that episode for that reason. Even though like the point of the episode was how Bart was facading himself as this religiously enlightened person, to get out of trouble. And people have done that in history where they'll say, okay, you know what, I've done bad behavior because I was possessed by the devil, or in my dream, I was talking to Jesus and he afflicted me of all my evil behavior. And there's people who will use religion as a way to justify bad behavior, justify that they've made the change, or justify I'm getting out of trouble. Oh well, I saw the light of God, so therefore I'm not. Therefore I'm gaining insight, and we're all going to stop there. We're not going to actually look at my behavior. So I would say that that was also another thing that I think that in some cases they want to go in a certain direction or preach a certain direction, and that just doesn't appeal to me. And I think that if you're trying to be very forcive of shoving Christianity down people's gullets, that's not the show that I grew up with. And I think the other thing that I don't like about the show is that they've kind of had way too much fun. Like I remember, like there was an episode of The Simpsons where I believe it was like Bart, no, it was like Rod or one of Flanders' children get rejected by Flanders because of some bad behavior that they did, and he goes to live with Homer or whatever. And they did something where they had like a bunch of singing by a bunch of people backstage or by a choir about the situation. Like that's not something that I grew up with. I think that The Simpsons just knew what its humor was. They almost had a choice of saying, okay, maybe like here's the good humor and here's the dumb humor, but here's the humor that works for the show and here's the dumb humor. And I think that they've kind of gone in the direction of the dumb humor. You also have the show being like kind of narcissistic. Like we remember when Lisa said that okay, I'm a cruciverbalist, somebody who does crossword puzzles. You have Mr. Burns like look at the show and said, okay, look at the audience and be like, okay, everybody, those who love professional wrestling are potential morons. Again, you're making a show about Bart being a heel wrestler, and this is in the 2000, the late 2010s, or even the early 2020s, when that would have been a better episode in the early 2000s, and you could have done something, way more, way more fun. Just like when Homer and Bart went into Tokyo and they were just hitting like the sumo wrestler with a chair, and Bart threw the Emperor of Japan into like the sumo thongs. Like honestly, if you incorporated it, and that worked because at the time professional wrestling was in the cultural zeitgeist. So honestly, it's almost like you missed that target by, almost 20 years. And then I would also even say with South Park, the reason why they talked about professional wrestling in South Park so late was because there was an argument of taking amateur wrestling out of the Olympics, because one of the big things about amateur wrestling is people get professional wrestling and amateur wrestling mixed up, because amateur wrestling is not in the cultural zeitgeist. And then also when you look at amateur wrestling, it's not as entertaining as professional wrestling. So that's why they had that episode. But I think if they both had episodes about professional wrestling during the Attitude Era, and they both had the golden ticket to do so, that would have been a better show, really. But also too, and I know I've said this before, like I know that there's a hypocrisy. People say, well, you like South Park, Byron, but they're up their asses in their own messages, but they have way better and superior writing. I think that they're good at creating situations where a character will reflect and will think, and sometimes there's messages in the show that are not direct. Like I think in the COVID episode where they go into the future, there's a lot of lessons from that about how about self-sacrifice in Cartman's character, but also just how you look at Cartman and the big thing about his life is that he got out of South Park and he changed his ways and he listened to people to make him better. He could have easily learned that in the other timeline where he becomes a Jewish rabbi, or he could have learned that in this timeline where where Carbon's destined to grow up poor and homeless. But even though like Butter said something like he just never chose to grow up, he never chose to change his ways. That's somewhat on the nose, but it's not like directly preaching a message. And sometimes South Park they do directly preach a message, but the difference between The Simpsons and South Park is that the messages are usually in the storytelling and everything like that's is flowed out a lot better in South Park. When you have Mr. Burns, just get very when you have do a dead on shot, Mr. Burns saying people like professional wrestling are dead on morons. That doesn't do anything but say okay, there are people who believe that, and I know you're trying to do a fourth wall joke of hating the audience who like professional wrestling, but it does come off as cheap and uninspired, and what people saying something like that would be a little bit more would get to people's emotions back in the 90s or the early two or in the 1990s or like during the Attitude Era, but doing that in 2019 that's just not that's just too late. That's you're giving somebody a 10-year-old expired cookie by doing that. Yeah, I live with my brother, so I got to make sure he's not home, or else he's going to open the door and ruin this talk really. But there's a lot of reasons for why I don't think that The Simpsons is good. It has not gotten good, and I do think that's also bad too. It hurts their legacy. I think like from now, if you ever want to watch The Simpsons from the 80s to 1999 was the best era of The Simpsons. Maybe a couple of years after that, but I would really say like around 1989 to 2010, that was probably a good and a bad year to The Simpsons. I think everything after that, I don't even watch it. And I think the other thing too is that the actors are getting older, the voice actors. The woman who does Marge Simpson's voice, obviously her voice changed because she's getting older. And the other thing about it is that you're actually having some people die in The Simpsons because of age. You had Edna Krabappel's voice actors die. You just had Ralph Wiggum's voice actress die, and Martin Van Prince's voice actress die. So they're getting so old that actually a lot of these people are getting because they've been doing this since the 80s, late 80s. So a lot of these people have to be in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So they have to kind of end it. So because that's, and even like with Trey Parker and Matt Stone, there may be a day, they use more computers to kind of fix their voices. But they're both in their 50s. But there will be a day when on Trey Parker, Matt Stone, they're going to either not relate to people. I think in maybe 10 or 15 years they get going, you're probably going to see the old people in South Park kind of represent their voice. But it's going to get to a point where it's just not going to appeal to anybody. So everything dies. So I will say that with The Simpsons, I hope that this is the end of them. And I also hope, because this will create a chain reaction, this will kind of bring up conversations about ending Family Guy, which I also think should have ended a long time ago. But I also think that the other thing was that there's a lot of fear in ending The Simpsons, just like SpongeBob. People over rely on The Simpsons. That's why there's not a lot of great animation on Fox, because they over rely on The Simpsons. They got it out of the park with Family Guy. But everything else has not been good animation. I know like they did the Cleveland show. I would say like the other one's American Dad. Because American Dad's been going on for a very long time. I think almost like 15, 16 years. Cleveland show was a couple of years. But I would say like those are really the big three in my opinion. And I know that's controversial. American Dad. And I think what a lot of people, like American Dad's on TBS and other programming. So I think a lot of people like it because, it's definitely a big contrast from Family Guy, and also with American Dad. I think the characters are more likable, and sometimes you kind of tease characters like Steve actually getting some success, really. So I think that seeing an underrated character kind of develop into something, people like that because that's true to real life. But in The Simpsons, you don't get a character like that. In Family Guy, you don't get a character like that. So, but those are their big three in a sense. It's really The Simpsons, since '89, Family Guy since 1999, and American Dad since the mid 2000s, really, and it's been around for almost 15 years. But what I really had to say is that, it would be good to kind of create a chain reaction because there will be other creators and other shows. Because I think Rick and Morty, 100%, that should have been on Fox, and that should have been getting the big bucks. That could have been the second renaissance of Fox adult animations if they had Rick and Morty on there. Or, what would have happened if I mean, there was also King of the Hill, but King of the Hill just knew how to end itself, at the right amount of time, really. But I do think that I hope the Simpsons is end. I hope it does die, and it's a good death, really. It's just like things can't go on forever. If there's a drop in quality, it's not worth having, really. I think every single time we do a project, we do anything, we need to challenge ourselves, and also when something like the Simpsons is a cash cow, and other things like that, they should always work on their quality every single year, and I don't see that. And with the episodes that I do see, I just think that they're all about shitting out episodes than about quality, really. And if they're like that, then they really shouldn't be around, really. They should just be like, okay, you know what, we're just printing money, but they're going to be in syndication for probably the rest of Mac Groening's and everybody else's life. Probably the next 3 or 4 decades, they're probably going to be under syndication. The same way Family Matters is under syndication. Really. They're going to be making royalties and everything like that, really. Or they could even do something like just no more, like the show ends, but then you do a Simpsons movie, or maybe every couple of years you do that. And that would be the ending of it, So I do think that, as I said, I really just hope that this is the end of The Simpsons. It needs to go. It's outstayed its welcome. It's hurting its legacy. It's not good for the people working on it if you don't have writers that are motivated to challenge themselves, or you don't challenge yourself with interesting characters or storylines or do new stuff. And also if you even have something where, like it's just not good for the voice actors or anybody else, really. And I think the last thing that I'll say is that I've not liked how they try to get controversy. Now, the big controversy is the show ending. Last year, they did something like, well, one of the bar people are actually going to die, and it's some random person you never thought about, just like, oh, well, one random person out of the group, really. So I just kind of think that, they also try to do that, too. They try to get any type of attention that they can, really, and it's not from good storytelling. It's just from, like, doing these things that may be a little shocking. That may shock people or whatever, really. So I do think that it's like what I've said before, that, or they say something like we're going to solve a 20-year-old mystery, or we're going to do a storyline where Marge marries Artie Ziff, the other person that she was going to marry or whatever, really. They seem to kind of like put things that people want to see, but they do it in a very lackluster way, or they kind of hype it instead of having better storylines and other characters. And I also think the big thing that they have is the status quo is God. These characters don't develop into better people, and that makes more challenging writing. Because, like I said, what would happen if you had a season where Homer and Marge are divorced, and then you do another season where they actually think about getting back together? Then the third season after that, they actually stay divorced, and then the fourth season they actually get back together, and then you actually bring them back together, and they have some insight. And then they fall back into their old ways, really. Then you would have like 5 years of a storyline and different characters and better storytelling and better character development. And then kind of going back to what Sharon Marsh said, that sometimes you just go back to what you know, really. You could learn so many things, but sometimes, you feel safer with what you have, really, So it's that, really. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'll say that I don't like The Simpsons for. They don't have any desire to challenge themselves, and that's the reason why I think it should end, most importantly.